The first day at Thermopylae began with a display of extreme confidence from Xerxes, one that would quickly clash with the reality of Greek discipline. The Persian king, commanding the largest army the world had yet seen, assumed the Spartans would crumble under sheer numbers. He believed the narrow coastal pass was a simple obstacle, easily swept aside by the tide of his men. To enforce his will, Xerxes unleashed a vast arrow barrage aimed to intimidate and overwhelm. Historical accounts suggest the sky darkened with the volley, a literal storm of shafts meant to break Spartan morale. Yet the Spartans had anticipated such an attack. Their heavy bronze armor, combined with large aspis shields and tightly packed phalanx formations, turned the arrows into mostly harmless projectiles. They bent forward, shield edges overlapping, forming a nearly impenetrable wall. When the arrows hit, they clanged against bronze, bounced off leather straps, or lodged harmlessly in the soft ground. The Spartans' preparation and discipline rendered the Persian numerical superiority ineffective, a testament to rigorous training and the advantages of terrain. Xerxes then ordered his infantry to press forward, confident that brute force would shatter the Greeks. The Persian infantry was diverse, including lightly armed conscripts and lightly armored archers, as well as more heavily equipped units. In open terrain, these troops could have advanced with overwhelming effect, but the narrow pass forced them into a linear formation, negating the advantage of numbers. The Greeks, organized in overlapping ranks of spearmen, simply absorbed the attacks. The first row held spears against the advancing enemy, while successive rows braced behind, ready to thrust when gaps appeared. Any Persian attempting to break through was met by a disciplined thrust from the next row, creating a rhythm of attack and defense that the uncoordinated Persian waves could not match. The Spartans used their spears not only to strike, but also to control the enemy's movement, pushing them back and preventing penetration into the line. The terrain amplified this advantage. The pass was a narrow strip between the mountains and the sea, restricting the width of the battlefield. Persian cavalry, which could have been devastating in open plains, was almost useless here. Only a few could advance at a time, and those who did were easy targets for the phalanx. The Greeks understood that in such confined space, every additional soldier added little tactical advantage. While the organized, cohesive units of hoplites could function at full efficiency, Xerxes' orders for wave after wave of troops only worsened the problem. Each new wave faced the same disciplined Spartan shield wall, taking heavy losses without meaningful progress. Psychologically, the first day demonstrated a clash between hubris and strategy. Xerxes assumed that sheer scale equaled inevitability. He believed that fear of overwhelming numbers would shatter the Spartan resolve. Yet the Spartans' code of discipline and training turned confidence into a weapon of endurance. For the Greek soldiers, the initial barrage and frontal assault were a test of preparation. Their training emphasized synchronization, trust in the man beside them, and calm execution under pressure. While arrows filled the air and the ground shook under the Persian advance, the Spartans moved as one, each man responding instinctively to the rhythm of the phalanx. The cohesion of their movement turned individual vulnerability into collective strength, demonstrating the profound effect of unit discipline in battle. Casualties on the first day began to mount for the Persians almost immediately. Unlike the disciplined Greek hoplites, many Persian units were poorly trained or irregular conscripts. Facing the rigid Greek line, these soldiers were easy targets. Spears thrust from gaps in the line or held in place by shield pressure struck repeatedly, creating points of high attrition. Confusion quickly spread within the Persian ranks as soldiers found themselves immobilized in the narrow pass, unable to maneuver or retreat effectively. The Greeks' limited numbers and strategic positioning allowed them to concentrate force on these small groups, neutralizing large portions of Xerxes' army with minimal exposure. The first day also showcased the role of leadership. King Leonidas maintained command of the Spartan forces, issuing clear orders and adjusting the formation when necessary. His presence was stabilizing. Soldiers drew strength from knowing their king stood among them, unflinching. This contrasted sharply with the Persian command structure, where sheer numbers made control difficult. Orders from Xerxes were transmitted through intermediaries, often slowed or distorted. The result was fragmented execution, with some units attacking prematurely or without coordination, leading to further Persian losses. The disciplined hierarchy of the Greeks proved to be a force multiplier. allowing a small army to withstand overwhelming odds. Strategically, the first day set the tone for the battle. Xerxes underestimated the effect of the choke point and overestimated the effectiveness of his assault. The Persian attacks were predictable, and the Spartans used repetition to their advantage, turning brute force into a controlled experiment in attrition. Each wave of Persian soldiers provided information about enemy tactics, which could be countered by adjusting spear angles, spacing, and shield placement. The Greeks' adaptability, combined with their discipline, meant that the Persian numerical advantage never translated into tactical advantage. Even the environment worked in favor of the defenders. A narrow pass funneled Persian troops into tight spaces where the Greeks could attack with spears in unison. Loose rocks, uneven ground, and slopes added to the difficulty for attackers, while the hoplites maintained a stable line. Xerxes' generals may have assumed that sheer weight and momentum would carry his troops through, but in reality, the terrain amplified every Persian mistake and minimized every Greek risk. Discipline, terrain, and cohesion transformed the small Spartan-led force into an immovable object against a massive assault. By the end of the first day, the psychological message was clear. Xerxes' army had not only failed to breach the line, but suffered unexpected casualties. The arrogance that had fueled his expectations began to waver, while the Greeks' confidence grew. Each soldier realized the effectiveness of their training and position, reinforcing morale. Even though the Persians outnumbered them by hundreds of thousands, the battlefield at Thermopylae demonstrated that strategy. Terrain and discipline could neutralize overwhelming numerical superiority. The first day of Thermopylae is remembered not for a breakthrough, but for the steadfast defense of the pass. It set the foundation for the remaining 2 days, teaching the Greek soldiers the power of coordination and the value of preparation. Each arrow that struck bronze, and each assault that faltered against the phalanx, became part of a living lesson in tactical patience, collective discipline, and the limits of arrogance. The story is a masterclass in how a small, organized, and determined force can withstand a storm of superior numbers, and why Xerxes' confidence would ultimately meet its match. If this analysis resonates, like, comment, and subscribe to Dumb Historian. Here, we dissect history with calm, precise reasoning, revealing how strategy, discipline, and terrain turned impossible odds into a test of endurance and mastery at Thermopylae. The second day of Thermopylae unfolded under the shadow of Xerxes' growing frustration. After witnessing the first day's failure, the Persian king's arrogance transformed into blind rage. He could not comprehend how a relatively small force had held the narrow pass against his massive army. Xerxes was convinced that sheer numbers alone should guarantee victory, and his impatience drove him to escalate the assault. This was a critical error, rooted in the assumption that the Greeks' resilience was a temporary phenomenon that could be overcome by persistent pressure. To execute this plan, he committed his best-trained and most disciplined units, including the legendary Immortals, a corps of elite Persian infantry reputed for their skill and battlefield prowess. He believed that if anyone could break through the Spartan-led phalanx, it would be these soldiers. Yet, the terrain and Greek strategy turned their strength into vulnerability. The Spartans, anticipating such a push, prepared with meticulous attention to detail. Their commanders analyzed the battlefield and recognized that the pass widened slightly in certain areas, creating spaces where a frontal assault could be vulnerable to counterattack. Rather than confronting the Persian waves head-on in the narrowest sections, the Spartans employed a feigned retreat. Small detachments would simulate withdrawal, subtly drawing the advancing Persian units into areas where the Greeks could exploit the widened terrain. Once the Persians were overextended and disorganized, the Spartans would pivot with deadly precision. Spears struck in unison, shields pressed forward, and the tightly packed phalanx regained cohesion, turning what seemed like retreat into a calculated trap. The Greek tactic depended not on deception for its own sake, but on disciplined execution and a keen understanding of battlefield geometry. The Immortals, confident in their elite status, advanced with expectation of an easy breakthrough. They were met instead by the impenetrable wall of bronze and disciplined coordination. The phalanx did not merely absorb attacks, it manipulated the momentum of the enemy. Persian soldiers, expecting to rout the Greeks as they had done elsewhere, found themselves funneled into tight areas where their numbers became a liability. The Spartans' spears struck from unexpected angles, taking advantage of overextended opponents. The rhythm of thrust, withdraw, and re-engage turned the assault into a grinding trap. The Immortals, for all their skill, could not adapt quickly enough to the combined tactics of terrain, discipline, and strategic patience. Xerxes' decision to rely on repeated frontal assaults compounded the cost. Each wave suffered heavy casualties, and the psychological toll began to affect the Persian ranks. Men who had advanced, expecting a decisive victory, now faced the shocking reality of organized resistance that could absorb even the best-trained units. Confusion spread as soldiers attempted to navigate the confined space under constant pressure from the phalanx. Orders from Persian commanders often arrived too late or were miscommunicated, resulting in disjointed movements and gaps in the assault lines. The elite status of the Immortals offered no protection from such chaos. Rigid adherence to orders in combination with terrain constraints made them predictable targets for the Greek defenders. The feigned retreat also demonstrated the Greeks' mastery of tactical psychology. By deliberately allowing the Persians to believe they were winning, the Spartans manipulated their opponents into overconfidence. When the Persians committed fully into the widened sections of the pass, their formations were stretched thin and coordination faltered. The Greeks then reversed the maneuver with precision, striking into the flanks and isolating small groups. Spears punctured shields and armor, while soldiers pushed relentlessly to exploit every imbalance. Even elite Persian soldiers, accustomed to leading charges elsewhere, were caught off guard by the cohesion and timing of the Spartan counterattack. The second day thus became a lesson in how discipline and anticipation could neutralize numerical and reputational advantages on the battlefield. Terrain remained a force multiplier for the Greeks. The pass at Thermopylae was uneven with rocks, inclines, and narrow choke points that prevented the Persians from fully deploying their formations. Cavalry, typically decisive in Persian campaigns, was essentially ineffective. Infantry advancing through constricted paths were forced into disordered lines, making them easy targets for the phalanx. The Greeks exploited every slope and rock to control engagement distances, ensuring that the heavier, slower Persian forces bore the brunt of attacks while the hoplites retained cohesion. The phalanx acted almost as a living machine, each soldier responding to small adjustments from neighbors, maintaining formation integrity even under the psychological pressure of facing elite troops. Leadership once again proved decisive. King Leonidas and subordinate commanders coordinated timing and movements with signals and prearranged contingencies. Unlike the Persian chain of command, which suffered from size and communication lag, the Spartan leadership could observe and react in real time. This allowed feigned retreats and counterattacks to succeed without confusion. Soldiers trusted both their training and their leaders, reinforcing morale amidst the chaos of repeated assaults. The psychological advantage of cohesion became as important as the physical advantage of terrain and armor. Casualties on the second day mounted dramatically for Xerxes' forces. His reliance on elite troops was intended to expedite victory, but instead concentrated losses among his most capable soldiers. The psychological blow of seeing even the Immortals repelled shook the confidence of Persian units in reserve. Exhaustion began to set in among attackers who had expected an easy advance. The Greek defenders, by contrast, maintained relatively low casualties due to tactical positioning and the effective use of terrain. The narrow pass ensured that even smaller groups of Greeks could focus force on individual points, neutralizing the overwhelming number of Persian soldiers in a controlled and efficient manner. By the end of the second day, Xerxes' strategy had not only failed, but also highlighted the limitations of overconfidence and the dangers of rigid adherence to assumptions. His failure to adapt, despite clear evidence from the previous day's engagements, exposed the Persian army to repeated avoidable losses. Meanwhile, the Spartans reinforced their reputation for discipline and adaptability, demonstrating that a well-trained, cohesive force could withstand elite opposition when leveraging both terrain and tactical ingenuity. The second day of Thermopylae stands as a masterclass in defensive warfare. It emphasizes that battlefield success is not solely determined by numbers or reputation, but by discipline, timing, leadership, and the intelligent use of environmental factors. The Spartans' ability to manipulate expectation, execute complex maneuvers under pressure, and maintain cohesion against elite forces turned what seemed like inevitable defeat into a powerful strategic stand. The combination of feigned retreats, controlled counterattacks, and exploitation of terrain exemplifies how a smaller force can repeatedly frustrate a superior enemy. The events of this day underscore a critical principle of warfare. Blind confidence, no matter how backed by numbers or elite units, can be defeated by preparation, coordination, and psychological insight. Xerxes' rage and overcommitment, while understandable from the perspective of an ego-driven king, ultimately played into the hands of the Greek defenders, amplifying their effectiveness and ensuring that the Persian army's advance remained stalled. This analysis of the second day of Thermopylae, focusing on Xerxes' costly assaults and the Spartans' tactical mastery, offers a precise view of how leadership, terrain, and disciplined execution defined the outcomes of battles. Every wave of Persian soldiers repelled by a calculated maneuver reinforces the timeless lesson that strategy and adaptability outweighs sheer force. The third day of Thermopylae is defined by a single catastrophic act: betrayal. Ephialtes, a local Greek, approached Xerxes with a secret that changed the course of the battle. Motivated by a promised reward gold status or favor, he revealed the existence of a hidden mountain path that allowed the Persian army to bypass the narrow coastal pass entirely. Until that moment, the Greeks had relied on the pass's natural choke point to neutralize the overwhelming numerical advantage of the Persian army. Every strategy, every phalanx formation, every feigned retreat and counterattack was predicated on controlling that narrow strip of land. Ephialtes' knowledge rendered all of that meticulous planning vulnerable to a single coordinated flanking maneuver. Xerxes, always impatient for results and eager to see his divine will enacted, acted immediately. Without hesitation, he dispatched a portion of his elite troops, the Immortals, to traverse the hidden path and attack the Greek rear. This decision was logical from a military standpoint, but it was also facilitated entirely by Ephialtes' betrayal. The Persians now had a two-pronged attack: the main frontal assaults in the pass, which had already been repelled with heavy losses, and a new threat emerging from an unexpected direction. The Greek defenders, who had been confident in their defensive advantage, suddenly faced the horrifying reality of encirclement. The narrow pass that had once guaranteed tactical superiority became a potential trap. King Leonidas, aware of the betrayal, faced an impossible choice. Retreat would save lives but abandon the defensive position that had bought critical time for the rest of Greece to mobilize. Surrender was not an option, both morally and strategically, as it would undermine the resolve of the Greek city-states and the larger defensive campaign. Instead, Leonidas made the decision that would define his legacy. He ordered the Spartans and their allied forces to stay in place, holding the pass to the last man. This was not a reckless act of heroism. It was a calculated sacrificial maneuver designed to allow the bulk of the Greek army to retreat, reorganize, and prepare for future engagements. Every moment the defenders held the line delayed Xerxes' advance and provided a strategic benefit that extended beyond Thermopylae itself. The Greeks' discipline and cohesion were tested to their limits. Facing attacks from both the front and rear, they maintained the integrity of their formations. Spartans and Thespians, bound by rigorous training and unwavering resolve, adjusted to the encirclement as best they could. The phalanx shifted. Flanking units rotated to cover vulnerable angles, and commanders issued rapid orders to respond to the new threat. Yet, despite their training, the scale of the Persian flanking force was overwhelming. Numbers that could not have been overcome in the past were now converging from multiple directions. The psychological impact of betrayal also cannot be overstated. The knowledge that a compatriot had sold their position introduced fear and uncertainty into the minds of even the most disciplined soldiers. Trust, a crucial component of military cohesion, was shaken. The Spartans, however, drew on their legendary ethos, transforming the shock of treachery into renewed resolve. They understood that their stand was larger than themselves. It was a statement to all of Greece that discipline, courage, and sacrifice could delay even an unstoppable force. Each spear thrust, each shield block, each coordinated advance became an assertion of control in a situation that had suddenly spiraled into chaos. Ephialtes' betrayal also demonstrates a timeless principle of warfare. Information and local knowledge can outweigh sheer numbers. The pass at Thermopylae had been the Greeks' force multiplier. But once the Persians gained insight into terrain that was supposed to be hidden, the balance of power shifted dramatically. A smaller force, no matter how disciplined or well-led, is extraordinarily vulnerable if the enemy can circumvent the very conditions that made the defense effective. The narrow pass had been a fortress in microcosm. and the mountain path opened a back door that nullified years of preparation, planning, and strategy. As the day progressed, the Greek defenders held as long as humanly possible. Waves of Persian troops from the rear forced them to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. The elite Spartans, known for their unwavering courage, bore the brunt of the assault, allowing allies to retreat where possible, even as exhaustion, injuries, and the inevitability of encirclement weighed heavily on them. The phalanx formation remained remarkably effective, repelling frontal assaults and maximizing the defensive advantage. Wherever the terrain allowed, their discipline slowed the Persian advance and inflicted significant casualties, demonstrating the potency of training and cohesion even in the face of near-certain death. Strategically, Leonidas' decision ensured that the Persian advance was not a straightforward march. Time, bought by the Spartans' sacrifice, allowed other Greek city-states to mobilize defenses and coordinate counterattacks. The psychological effect of the Spartans' stand resonated far beyond Thermopylae, inspiring resistance across Greece. While the battle was a tactical loss in the immediate sense, it became a strategic component in the larger Persian wars. The combination of terrain exploitation, disciplined defensive tactics, and calculated sacrifice created ripple effects that would influence subsequent battles, including Salamis and Plataea. Ephialtes, for all his treachery, illustrates a broader truth about the interplay of personal ambition and battlefield dynamics. One individual's knowledge and decision-making can radically alter outcomes, especially when the opposing force is small and reliant on environmental advantages. His betrayal, driven by greed and opportunism, underscores the vulnerability inherent in any system dependent on trust and local intelligence. The consequences were immediate and devastating for the Greek defenders at Thermopylae. But the larger strategic lesson that a force's success is as dependent on human factors and intelligence as it is on numbers or training remains timeless. The third day at Thermopylae, therefore, is remembered not only for the heroism of the Greek defenders, but also for the stark impact of betrayal in warfare. Ephialtes' act demonstrates that even the most disciplined, well-prepared, and courageous forces can be undone if their enemy gains critical knowledge. The Spartans' response, choosing to hold the line despite the inevitability of encirclement, transforms this narrative into a study of sacrifice. Leadership under extreme pressure and the enduring importance of morale, cohesion, and tactical foresight. In analyzing this decisive event, it becomes clear that battlefield outcomes are never determined solely by force, size, or armor quality. Terrain, intelligence, psychological factors, and the human propensity for both loyalty and treachery converge to define victory and defeat. Thermopylae's third day serves as a cautionary tale, no matter how unassailable a position appears. The combination of insider knowledge and opportunism can render even the most disciplined army vulnerable. Yet, within this vulnerability lies the opportunity for extraordinary courage and strategic foresight. As demonstrated by Leonidas and his men, whose actions echoed throughout Greek history and military doctrine, the final day of Thermopylae is defined by one act that transformed a tactical defeat into a symbol of enduring courage: the deliberate sacrifice of the Spartans and their allies. When King Leonidas realized that Ephialtes' betrayal had allowed the Persians to flank the Greek positions, he faced a stark choice. The pass could no longer be held without being encircled. Retreat would save lives, but surrender the critical position and the momentum of Greek resistance. Instead, Leonidas made a calculated decision that fused military strategy with psychological warfare. He ordered the majority of the Greek army to retreat. The Thespians, Thebans, and other allied contingents withdrew, preserving their forces for the ongoing defense of Greece. This maneuver ensured that while Thermopylae itself would fall, the larger Greek war effort would remain viable. Every soldier who left the pass carried not just experience, but a vital lesson in discipline, strategy, and coordination that would inform future engagements at Salamis, Plataea, and beyond. Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, along with a small contingent of Thespians and other allies, remained. Their choice was not driven by hubris or a desire for glory alone. It was a strategic act to delay the Persian advance and inflict maximum casualties while protecting the broader Greek cause. Surrounded on all sides, they knew their position was untenable. Yet, within that inevitability lay an opportunity for a different kind of victory, a psychological victory, The Spartans' final stand sent a clear message. A small, disciplined force, motivated by principle and cohesion, could resist even an overwhelming army. The battle that followed was brutal and close quarters. The Spartans utilized their superior armor, shields, and the phalanx formation to absorb waves of Persian attacks. Spear met sword and arrow, bronze clashed against bronze. Every movement was deliberate, every defense coordinated, and every counterattack precise. Despite exhaustion and dwindling numbers, the Spartans maintained cohesion, forcing the Persians to fight at the edge of their numerical advantage rather than fully exploiting it. Leonidas' decision also had profound strategic implications beyond the battlefield. By holding the pass to the last man, he allowed the rest of the Greek forces crucial time to mobilize defenses, reinforce positions, and coordinate a more effective resistance against Xerxes' invasion. Without this delay, the Persian army, unopposed and confident, could have marched through central Greece unimpeded, potentially crippling Greek resistance before it had a chance to consolidate. The sacrifice of the 300 was, paradoxically, an investment in the survival and eventual victory of the larger Greek coalition. Psychologically, the stand of the Spartans created an enduring symbol. Their unwavering courage and disciplined resistance inspired morale, not just on the battlefield, but across the Greek city-states. News of the Spartans' valor traveled quickly, providing a rallying point for unity against a common enemy. The combination of strategic foresight and human resilience transformed what could have been remembered as a simple defeat into a story of heroism and tactical ingenuity that would echo for centuries. Even in their final moments, the Spartans demonstrated the military principles that had made them elite. They rotated exhausted soldiers to the front, maintained shield walls to protect against encirclement, and countered flanking attempts with disciplined spear thrusts. The sheer physical and mental endurance required to fight under constant attack, fully aware that no reinforcements would arrive, underscores the magnitude of their achievement. The Persians, for all their numbers, struggled against the efficiency and cohesion of this small, determined force. This final sacrifice highlights a timeless truth of warfare. Sometimes the most effective strategy is not outright victory on the ground, but the creation of conditions that favor the broader conflict. Leonidas understood that a local tactical defeat could be leveraged into strategic advantage if it allowed his allies time to prepare and morale to remain intact. By consciously choosing to remain, knowing the personal cost, he ensured that Thermopylae would become a symbol of resistance and that the Greek forces would fight on with clarity, coordination, and renewed purpose. The stand of the Spartans also illustrates the interplay of psychology and strategy in war. The act of defiance, even in the face of inevitable death, imposed a psychological cost on the Persians. The arrogance of Xerxes' overwhelming force was met with unyielding discipline, frustrating commanders and forcing them into prolonged engagement in terrain that favored the defenders. The Persians' expectation of an easy victory was shattered, and the Spartan stand delayed the conquest of central Greece, buying the Greeks time to organize a more effective defense. In examining the final glorious sacrifice at Thermopylae, it becomes evident that the actions of Leonidas and his men were not merely heroic gestures, but a calculated integration of battlefield tactics, psychological insight, and long-term strategic planning. The 300 Spartans, alongside their allies who chose to remain, turned a hopeless situation into a defining moment of resistance. Their disciplined, courageous stand demonstrated that human will, preparation, and principle could momentarily counter the immense weight of an empire. Thermopylae's third day serves as a study in the convergence of loyalty, strategy, and moral resolve, while the Persians eventually overran the position. The significance of Leonidas' choice extended far beyond immediate military outcomes. By sacrificing themselves in a controlled, purposeful manner, the Spartans preserved the larger Greek cause and provided a template for psychological and tactical lessons that would influence military thought for generations. The story of the final stand is a lesson in how calculated sacrifice, rather than reckless bravery, can shape the course of history. Leonidas' decision to remain with his men, facing certain death, ensured that Thermopylae became a cornerstone of Greek identity, strategy, and morale. The courage and discipline exhibited by the Spartans transformed an act of tactical defeat into a lasting symbol of human resilience. The power of cohesive action and the ability of a small, determined force to impact the momentum of a much larger conflict. The conclusion of Thermopylae is often remembered for the almost mythic courage of the 300 Spartans and their allies. But the real significance lies in the combination of strategy, sacrifice, and psychological impact that they created. After 3 grueling days, the narrow pass was finally overrun. Every Spartan and the remaining allied soldiers who chose to stand with them fell to the overwhelming Persian forces. Their bodies filled the pass, the echo of bronze and battle cries fading into the silence of defeat. Yet, in that seeming annihilation, something far greater was achieved than the immediate tactical results might suggest. The sacrifice of the Spartans allowed the rest of the Greek forces crucial time to prepare for subsequent battles. The retreating allies carried vital intelligence about Persian movements, battle tactics, and the geography of the pass. They were able to regroup, reinforce Athens, and organize the naval defense at sea. Without the delay provided by Leonidas' stand, the Persian army might have swept through central Greece without opposition, potentially destroying morale and preventing the Greeks from mounting an effective resistance. The Spartans' last stand was a small yet decisive force multiplier. It amplified the strategic options of the Greek coalition far beyond the 300 who held the line. The psychological dimension of their sacrifice was equally profound. The courage demonstrated by the Spartans became a rallying point for the Greek city-states. News of the stand spread quickly, carried by soldiers, refugees, and messengers. The idea that a tiny, disciplined force could hold back the greatest army the world had seen instilled hope, discipline, and unity. It showed that victory was not just a matter of numbers, but of training, coordination, and willpower. This psychological victory was something Xerxes could not buy, cannot command, and could not destroy. It became a seed of resistance that flourished in the hearts and minds of the Greeks. The tactical lessons embedded in the final day of Thermopylae also cannot be overstated. The Spartans exemplified the power of disciplined formations, careful use of terrain, and coordinated defense. Even against superior numbers, the phalanx remained nearly impenetrable. Their ability to rotate troops, maintain defensive cohesion under extreme stress, and exploit choke points ensured that each Persian assault, however massive, exacted maximum cost, while the Persians could throw men forward in endless waves. The efficiency and organization of the Greek defenders allowed them to inflict disproportionate casualties, demonstrating that battlefield effectiveness depends on training and cohesion as much as numerical strength. Strategically, Thermopylae transformed the Greek understanding of warfare. It highlighted the value of delaying actions, the importance of terrain in shaping outcomes, and the role of psychological operations in sustaining morale. The Spartans understood that sometimes the most critical victories are not measured in enemy, dead, or territory, held but in the strategic options preserved for later, and in the narrative created by acts of resolve and courage. Leonidas' decision to remain with his men, accepting almost certain death, exemplified leadership that combined tactical awareness with moral authority. It taught that the example set by leaders can outweigh immediate material losses in shaping the course of a campaign. The battle also reinforced the concept that sacrifice can serve a broader purpose than self-preservation. Each Spartan who fell contributed not only to the immediate delay of Persian advance, but to the creation of a symbol larger than any single life. This act of ultimate commitment illustrated that disciplined action, rooted in principle, can create consequences that resonate far beyond the battlefield. The Spartan's stand became a moral and strategic template when circumstances are dire. Discipline, cohesion, and willingness to endure extreme hardship can turn an impossible situation into an opportunity for influence and legacy. Xerxes' failure at Thermopylae was compounded by overconfidence and impatience. He assumed that his numbers alone would guarantee victory and ignored the strategic advantage offered by the Greeks' disciplined formations and terrain usage. The psychological blow of repeatedly failing to break the narrow pass, combined with the public spectacle of Spartan defiance, eroded confidence and forced tactical errors that would haunt his campaign in the months to come. Thermopylae was not just a battlefield. It became a lesson in the limitations of hubris and the power of disciplined, focused resistance. In addition, the final sacrifice forged a narrative that would endure for centuries. The deaths of the Spartans were memorialized, not as a simple military loss, but as an enduring example of courage, discipline, and selflessness. Temples, inscriptions, and oral histories preserved the memory of Thermopylae, shaping not only Greek identity but also the broader understanding of what constitutes heroism in the face of insurmountable odds. Every detailed account of the battle emphasizes the moral dimension of the Spartans' choice, that duty, honor, and sacrifice carry a weight that can influence outcomes far beyond immediate events. The strategic brilliance of Leonidas lay in his understanding that the pass itself was more than just a point on a map, it was leverage. By holding Thermopylae as long as possible, he maximized the cost of Persian advances in terms of both lives and psychological impact. Each Persian soldier lost in repeated assaults was a drain on the resources and morale of Xerxes' army. Even though the Persians ultimately succeeded in taking the pass, the cost was amplified far beyond what might have been expected in a simple numerical engagement. The Spartans' defense forced Xerxes to pay dearly for every step, demonstrating that strategic thinking and disciplined action can turn even inevitable defeat into a powerful tool of influence. Thermopylae also illustrates the interplay of leadership, loyalty, and shared purpose. The Spartans' willingness to fight to the death was rooted in a shared understanding of duty, and in the example set by Leonidas, this cohesion ensured that even when surrounded, the Greek defenders remained coordinated, efficient, and deadly. It highlights a lesson often ignored in military theory. The human element trust, training, and mutual commitment can outweigh sheer numbers when combined with disciplined strategy. Finally, the legacy of Thermopylae lies in its embodiment of a principle that transcends war. Calculated sacrifice can amplify influence, inspire action, and preserve strategic advantage, even in the face of certain loss. The Spartans and their allies demonstrated that by accepting personal cost for a broader goal. A force can create consequences far beyond its immediate capabilities. This is why Thermopylae remains a cornerstone of military study, moral philosophy, and cultural memory, linking a narrow mountain pass to the ultimate demonstration of courage, discipline, and commitment. In the end, the narrow pass at Thermopylae became synonymous with unwavering resolve. The annihilation of the Spartan force did not erase their impact, it magnified it, through disciplined tactics, strategic foresight, and moral authority. Leonidas and his men converted a tactical defeat into an enduring historical and psychological victory, securing their place in history as the ultimate symbol of defiance against overwhelming odds. The story of Thermopylae teaches that courage, strategy, and sacrifice, when combined, can create a legacy far greater than survival alone. Liking, commenting, and subscribing to Dumb Historian will ensure you, Dan. Miss deep dives into battles where strategy and human will shape history in ways far beyond the battlefield.